To discuss the need for cooperation between government and business in the defense space, please join us in welcoming Doug Beck, Director of the Defense Innovation Unit, and Kent Walker, President of Global Affairs at Google. The conversation will be moderated by Andrew Sollinger, CEO of Foreign Policy Magazine.
Good morning. I'm Andrew Sollinger with Foreign Policy Magazine. Thank you so much for joining this morning for this excellent conversation. I'm joined on my left by Kent from Google and Doug from the DIU. We're super excited to have this discussion around bridging and operationalizing commercial tech for national security. That's the discussion that we're going to have today. And just to set the stage a little bit on some of the topics that we'll talk about, if we can get to them all, we have an ambitious agenda. We want to talk about balancing protection and progress. So how can we calibrate export controls, digital trade rules, research safeguards, and defense cooperation to outcompete our adversaries, but also to keep innovation secure without strangling innovation. We want to talk about talent as an important national resource and part of our infrastructure. We need to close the workforce gaps from frontier engineers through to electricians. Because we want to make sure that human capital underpins this innovation and growth, and we want to make sure that we are utilizing immigration and upskilling all in the correct ways of your partnerships. And then importantly, we also want to talk about government as a catalyst, not a roadblock, and that's something that we've encountered a great deal in past. We want to make sure that we're using federal procurement and national lab collabs to accelerate secure development of AI and make the public sector a launch pad for innovation. And if we have time, we'll get to power and energy at the end. I know that's a big, long agenda. So enough of me, though. We have some brilliant experts here, and I'd really like to hear their thoughts. And then, gentlemen, I'd love to start out with a question that's very blue sky and talk a little bit about what excites you about this moment of commercializing private sector technology for public. And maybe Doug, we could talk from you first a little bit about your thoughts on this.
Great. So first of all, thanks very much, Andrew, for that, and thank you to everybody for having me here. Ken, it's great to be up here with you. And really, it's great to see how many people are here. Just if we step back and think about this venue, what's happening today, and think back just a few years, right? This would have been unimaginable. So that's a measure of the progress that's been made, and we have an enormously long way to go. So maybe just reflecting on that for a second. You know, Ash Carter was prescient back in 2014 and in 2015, and seeing that there was no way that we could meet the strategic imperative facing the United States, particularly with respect to the People's Republic of China, but all the other challenges around the world, unless we were able to harness the incredible power of our commercially derived tech sector, which is where I was living most of my life at the time, part-time in uniform and full-time at Apple. And you know, and that's because in so much of the world, in 11 of the 14 critical areas that we must have for national security, areas like AI, cyber, space, energy, biotech, quantum, emerging areas like advanced manufacturing, those areas are going faster and probably always will in support of the relentless demands of billions of consumers around the world and the enterprises that serve them than they ever could in our purely bespoke defense-specific pathways. And that's why we need both, to Andrew's point, right? We need to be continuing to drive on those bespoke defense-specific things that, for example, once upon a time led to the invention of GPS. At the same time, we need to harness all that incredible power from the commercially derived tech universe. And that's what DIU then X was first stood up to do. So DIU 1.0, which was the initial piece of that, was really just about building a bridge between these two worlds at all. 2.0 was about proving that you could take real military problems and solve them with commercially derived technology using authorities we already had on the books but didn't know how to use. And we've now done that hundreds of times, over 500 at DIU and many hundreds in other organizations around the department have sprung up to help do it. And that's great, but it's not good enough. Because what we have to do now is take that capability and apply it for strategic effect, which means, first of all, focusing it on those most critical gaps we have to solve for to deter major conflict or win if we're forced to fight, and then scaling that capability to the point that it can actually deliver that strategic effect. At DIU, we're really focused on helping getting after that in two ways. First, as the national mission force for innovation, driving, working with the combatant commands and the services to drive the application and adaptation of tech for the warfighter. And then second, as a principal staff assistant to the secretary now, with a budget that's been substantially enhanced by Congress, to drive or help to drive that scaling of innovation across the department as a whole and help to catalyze all those in defense innovation ecosystem who are trying to help get after this. So as I said, we've come a long way to, so far. We've got a very, very long way to go, and I'm super excited to talk about it today.
Fantastic, and that's a wonderful jumping off point to talk a little bit about how the private enterprise is encompassing this. Kent, tell us what you're excited about.
Now, look, the work of DIU was always important, but right now it's critical because the rate of change we're seeing is astonishing. Even you all are excited about AI, or you wouldn't be here. But I'm not sure even this crowd knows that the rate of efficiency we are seeing is 300 times what we were seeing 2 years ago. Not 300%, 300 times. That's astonishing. That's Moore's Law on steroids.
Yeah.
That's partly because of the huge investment we and others are making in CapEx and R&D. We've always been an American innovation leader in terms of our investment, but those numbers have doubled in the last couple of years. But on top of that, we're seeing breakthrough after breakthrough. So mixtures of experts, chain of thought reasoning, agentic tools, sparse activation, most recently alpha evolved, self-improving models. This is an extraordinary moment, and it can't come too soon because obviously the race for geopolitical leadership, national security, is tied in with technological advances. You all probably know the story of the long century between the late 1700s and the early 1900s, where Britain led the world, largely because they led in coal and steel and navigation and textiles. And the 20th century, America led the world, in large part because we led in mass production and material science. It's an open question, who's going to lead the 21st century? And some of the signs are concerning. ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, puts out a survey of which countries are leading in various key strategic technologies, from chemistry to batteries and many more. Of the 64 technologies that ASPI tracks, in 2005, the US led in 57 of 64 technologies. Today, China leads in 60 of 64. That's a wake-up call and re-emphasizes the importance of this public-private collaboration, the work of DIU, the work of the private sector, and getting those incredible innovations that are happening at such speed into the hands of the Department of Defense, the federal government, and our allies.
Excellent. I just want to double check. Can everyone hear Kent well? Do we have another microphone that we could, it was hard for me to, I'm sitting next to him and it was a little hard to hear. So if we could try and get another microphone, that would be fantastic. Maybe a handheld. So let's talk a little bit about the global network and partnerships and how we're doing this globally. You were talking about the US lead and a little bit about China's lead as well. We work with lots of partners in this endeavor, of course. So I'd like to ask you both this question, and maybe we could start with you, Kent, on this, about the global network for strengthening national security and innovation. There are defense agreements with lots of different areas of the world. We have the US-India X agreement. We've got the DIU and UAE's Taoism Council and MIU defense cooperation. These show clear momentum towards strengthening international defense supply chains. That's from the government sector. How can public-private partnerships enhance that mutual capacity to work together for the US and its partners to create military capacity and utilize this cutting-edge technology, make that access dependable?
Sure. We talk about innovation, adoption, and acceleration. And there's a role for public-private partnership at each of those stages. We need to get our policy organization right, work through issues with regard to copyright and privacy and the like that actually facilitate American investment and continue leadership in AI. We need to make sure that we have widespread adoption. We'll come back to that in a second. There's an awful lot to be done there. And then we actually have to accelerate through energy and some of the other work that we're talking about. Now, it's tricky because you simultaneously want the world to be working on US platforms, but you have to recognize the security concerns about disseminating some of these tools too broadly through whether open source or distillation of US models or other means of being able to fast follow the advances we're making. We think the right approach to that and a key to unlocking a lot of this private-public partnership is through enhanced security. So we have our safe innovation framework. We work to make sure that we are sharing threat intelligence through Mandiant, which is one of the leading incident response groups used by the US government to identify cyber threats. But we're tracking 270 different foreign state actors that are trying to attack US government and US, continental US infrastructure in a given moment. That information exchange through the NSA's Cyber Command Center has been moved in a positive direction. We need to build on that and expand it into other areas. And then finally, if we can use that cyber model more generally to make sure our whole infrastructure is safe. We're very pleased that Google's tools are now IL5, IL6 certified for air gap thing. We're working on logical protections, so we don't necessarily have to just rely on air gap, but we can use the full power of the cloud to advance the work of government across the board. That's going to be an exciting next chapter.
Great, and maybe you could talk a little bit about those partnerships that I had mentioned in the SEX, for example, and how working with allies is important in this vector.
Absolutely, and I'm actually really glad that you brought this up because our allies and partners are absolutely central to the strategy for DIU, what we're doing with defense innovation more broadly. I mean, one of our greatest advantages as a nation is that we've got friends, and our friends are incredibly capable. And the tech, if I put my old tech guy hat on, comes from all of these countries.
Right.
And so it's critical for us working together as a defense innovation effectively community around the world to be able to really deliver first the very, very best tech from wherever it is. So all those DIU, almost all or most of those DIU projects are actually open to allies and partners, and allies and partners are part of the mix all the time. Plus we work really actively to help our US companies have access to the equivalents in other countries. So we work super closely with all the innovation entities of our allies and partners around the world. We help those who don't have one already to stand one up.
Yep.
And then we work to help that group be more of a community so we can get things done together. So maybe drill in a couple of the specifics. You mentioned India. So through IndusX, we've done a ton with the Indians. We had an MOU with them. We launched what's called a Gurukul education series that helps companies from both sides be able to work through each other's systems. We've now done 3 joint challenges with them in undersea maritime domain awareness, undersea comms, and now in space. We're working on what comes next right now. The Aussies and the Brits, both bilaterally and also trilaterally through AUKUS. We work very, very closely with them. We have exchange officers together, and we've delivered several challenges there. We've just done something on collaborative autonomy together in the maritime domain. The Japanese recently stood up an organization called DISTI, which we helped them stand up, an example of where we're helping partners do that. And then we've now launched the first couple of partners there. Challenges there. One of those, by the way, in AI and disinformation, and the other one in biosurveillance informed by AI. We're partnered with the Singaporeans, so Secretary Hegseth was just there, and you mentioned our partnership with the UAE that we just launched. So in all of these cases, the objective is, first of all, to focus on those critical problems that are shared operational problems to support the shared need to defend the free and open international system upon which we all depend, and deliver capability against those in places where we've got shared needs and also great tech in both countries, or all 3 countries. And then it's about, by doing so, helping also to deliver interoperability from the get-go where that makes sense, which is absolutely critical to our ability to work together.
Right.
And by doing that, merely the fact of our actions of working together in this way helps to reinforce those partnerships in other big ways. And also, frankly, it's a great deterrent because our adversaries hate it when we work together.
That's a very good point. Let's pick at that a little bit. So you were talking about a couple of different technologies and a few different types of systems in a couple of different theaters just now. And it would be great to talk a little bit about the changing battlefield in AI right now and your perspective on that. I'd love to know a little bit about some of the ways that AI is transforming the battlefield. You've cited a few examples, and what DIU is doing to help the U.S. harness this capability. And I know that this is before your time, and a couple of years ago that Indo-PACOM had introduced Stormbreaker, a program to develop an AI-enabled operational toolkit. Tell us about what's going forward, and some of the ways that you're applying this.
Yeah. So first thing I'd say is AI, and this will not be surprising to anybody who's here, or else you probably wouldn't be here, is absolutely central to every single one of our technology portfolios. So I mentioned all the areas of tech. We've got portfolios that work in all of them, and AI is central. So our work in energy is enabled by AI. Our work in space is enabled by and enables our work in AI, hybrid space architecture, for example. So we are working very closely with effectively all of the combatant commands and all the services on a broad range of areas where AI is unlocking critical capability for the warfighter on the battlefield of the future. So one example, for example, is what's come after Stormbreaker, which is a project called Thunderforge, which is one I think you may now be referring to, which is all about taking the very latest commercial grade generative AI capability, excuse me, and applying that operational toolkit into the planning function in order to ensure that our planners can think and move at the scale, speed, and complexity of the modern battlefield, which if you can't do that in the planning cycle, you can't do it when things go live. And so that's really a critical effort, and doing that across classification domains. There's a whole bunch of companies who are involved in that, from large to much smaller. So whether it's Scale AI to Andrew to Google, who's sitting right here, is all part of that. Microsoft. There are a number of other companies who are all part of that, and we're also linking that project up now with I saw Mike Gallagher here from Palantir a minute ago, with Palantir's MSS, maybe smart system capabilities. So that's an example. But we're also, if you look at the work we're doing in biosurveillance, that's about taking all that incredible data that we have out there, for example, in wastewater, leveraging AI to be able to bring that in, to be able to give the indications and warning that we need. We're doing a huge amount of work right now in autonomy, looking at how you actually do what's necessary to have collaborative autonomy for a heterogeneous fleet of unmanned vehicles under the sea, on the sea, in the air, able to work together, which means that they've got to be able to work together in a resilient way. They've got to be able to do that effectively when they can leverage the cloud. They've also got to be able to do it when they're not connected to the cloud. And that also means incredibly enhanced automatic target recognition, another major area. And I'll just throw one more out there, because I could talk all day about all the ways, as you can tell. You think about what's necessary for counter unmanned systems, another critical area for us, which we're seeing all around the world right now, including here at home, and our work for Northcom in being able to defend the homeland so that we can sense, decide, and act. And that decide piece is critical, because with all those threats coming all at once, you've got to be able to reduce operator burden, match the right effector to the right threat, even if you're in a populated area, and that's all about AI.
Great, and Ken, would love to hear your perspective on this, and Doug, of course, teed you up on Thunderforge as an example.
I'm a delighted partner on Thunderforge, work with Indo-PACOM for years, et cetera. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on. My favorite article title about AI in the last few years was something called GPTs are GPT2s, meaning generative pre-trained transformers are general purpose technologies. That's the umbrella that covers so much of what Doug was just talking about, because we tend to think of these things as chatbots. But that's 5% of the story.
Right.
We are using AI now for everything from ship maintenance to flight scheduling to cancer cures, working with the Department of Veterans Affairs and others. There's a remarkable breadth of activity going on. So sometimes the most important part of this is not starting with the AI solution, but starting with the problem. and figuring out how AI can streamline, accelerate, imagine new ways of doing things that weren't possible before. In a business context, the easy things to do are to cut revenue. To cut costs. Sometimes it's easier to cut revenue. But that's typically a new technology is used to reduce the cost of things you're already doing. It typically takes a couple of years to figure out how to increase revenue, because that involves imagining things you've never done before that are enabled by the new technology. That's very much the phase we're in now in sort of co-creating a lot of these new applications.
Fantastic.
Can I
Please.
just build on the build there for 1 second, because there's something that Kent just said that I think is super important, which is starting with a need rather than with the tech. So if you start with kind of a pure tech push of, hey, I've got a nifty technology, or if you start with an incredibly long, complicated requirements document from the government, you're not really going to get there. But if you start with a need, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Then you bring the technologists in to say, hey, how can that technology help to solve, how can we help to solve that critical problem? That's actually how we do it in the tech sector, right? If you think about, like, I go back to my whole life at Apple, if we'd asked the consumer back in 2006 or 7 what they wanted and what was going to be a smartphone, you would not have got an iPhone. You got like a flip phone that you could play Snake on faster and, I don't know what.
Right. One of the favorite lines at Google was Henry Ford's line, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, I would have invented a faster horse. Exactly.
Right? And the other point that I really want to drill in on here that I think was also embedded in something you said, Kent, is the importance of not just, so we clearly have to lead in the absolute frontier of frontier models, right? And what's possible with the most complex algorithms. We also have to lead in the rest of what we're doing in AI. So 2 concrete, simple examples. One of the most important things we've done over the last few years at DIU and AI is apply basic AI, basic ML ops tools to navigation updates for an autonomous platform that we helped the Navy to create in mine countermeasures.
Right.
That took the update of that system from what used to be a pull the hard drive off, mail it away, do whatever you're going to do to it, bring it back 6 months later, plug it back in, process. 6 months, unacceptable, to 1 to 2 weeks, still not good enough. We're working through that over the air and expand it more quickly. But that's basic ML ops tools that would be a snoozer for anybody in this room. Or another one is that even at the same time we think about the absolute frontier of generative AI, we've got to be thinking about what we can distill from that and get on device, which is what I would have called it my old life, or at the edge, is what we call it in our new life, because we've got to have the ability for autonomous vehicles, for example, to be effective even when they are disconnected and do what we want them to do and not do what we don't want them to do.
That's really fascinating. And something that you hit on there was about necessity and desire. And you know I wanted to pull this in. We were talking earlier about this weekend's drone attack in Russia by Ukraine. And I think the technical term that I heard for that was like completely bonkers, is that technical term. But we were talking a little bit about Replicator, which is DoD's effort to expedite development of basically drone software for the warfighter and tools. And this was going to scale up to thousands over the course of months, whereas these garage factories in Ukraine are developing thousands of drones a day because of the necessity. And necessity plus audacity is the mother of invention in Ukraine. How can we pledged that we would talk a little bit about getting bureaucracy out of the way of this development. I was just wondering if you could reflect on that for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, so 2 things. First, good news. Replicator and all the work around that has helped us as a department, all of us working together to do things in parallel that ordinarily we would do in serial in order to be in a position to be deploying multiple thousands, which is what we've talked about, of unmanned systems in support of the needs in the Indo-Pacific with the software to enable that and do it within 18 to 24 months from go and keep going from there. Rather than the 5 or 10 or 15 years that would ordinarily take.
Yep.
And the vice chairman said, basically this would normally take us 10 years. It's taken us sort of a year or so to do. That's great. At the same time, right, multiple thousands is nice, but and the kinds of unmanned systems we're talking about are not exactly equivalent, because most of what's going on in Ukraine right now is basically first-person view drones that are pretty simple and all full of Chinese parts and all that kind of stuff. But nevertheless, they're consuming 4,000 a day, right? A day. And we've got to be in a completely different universe than the one that we are in right now. And that's what we're trying to get to.
And we know we can do this. At the beginning of the Second World War, America trailed most of the world in making planes. We made I think it was about 300, maybe 1,000 a year. By the end of the Second World War, we were turning out almost 100,000, Ford's Willow Wren plant, etc. There's a line from Band of Brothers toward the end where one of the US GIs is looking at German soldiers going by with the horses dragging their wagons. They said, you had horses and wagons, and we had Ford and General friggin' Motors. How did you think you were going to win? Knudsen, who came in from the private sector to reorganize America's productivity, basically said, we buried the enemy in an avalanche of production. That's how we won the war. So how do we use that same urgency to think about how we're working here, not just at the high end, not just the cutting edge models, where we do still excel and we do have a little bit of a lead, although it's becoming neck and neck, but also at the adoption stage. That's so critical. The former CEO of Baidu over in China said, the Americans will lead in models and we will win because we lead in adoption. And right now, the Chinese people and the Chinese government are very focused on an optimistic approach to AI. 83% of Chinese are positive about AI. Only 34% of Americans are. And that optimism is a strategic advantage. It's leading them to drive their AI Plus program. They have more than 200,000 companies working in AI. And unless we can take advantage of our efficiency, not just the top end models, but the most efficient models, the most effective models, as Doug says, at the edge models. So we're putting these tools in the hands of everybody in a world where right now you're having a remarkable change in the battlefield where a $1,000 drone is taking out a multi-million-dollar tank,
right,
or a $100 million strategic bomber. That's a dramatic change. We need to figure out how to get better at scaling and spreading as well as leading.
This sounds like a great time to bring up the talent discussion as well, because what we also need is the talent to be able to develop these skills and scale it. So, Kent, this is one's for you. In Google's Powering a New Era of American Innovation paper that you recently released, you highlighted the need to develop the labor force required to construct new infrastructure. And your new AI action plan stresses access to top-tier AI researchers. Maybe you could share, and I know DIU also, Doug, has a need for dual fluence across the public-private divide. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the primary challenges your organizations are facing when it comes to talent, developing, attracting, retaining, and innovative approaches you're bringing to that. And don't be afraid, this is more for Kent, to bring in immigration reform and all those tough questions, private funding into the discussion.
This is true at every level. We tend to focus on the very top talent, but we actually need to bring along everybody, make them AI capable, and the people who are building the infrastructure. So let me quickly do that. At the high level, yes, we need immigration reform. Some of the leading people in this area have come from around the world. China's got 1.2 billion people working on this problem, but if we play our cards right, we've got 7 billion. Because we can take some of the greatest talent who want to come to the United States and have them work on this. The Attention is All You Need paper from Google in 2017 that opened this era of generative AI was written by 7 people who are immigrants and 1 who was the son of immigrants. We can't afford to turn our back on that incredible talent from around the world that wants to make our country and our allies safer and stronger. At the mid-level, there will be a change in the nature of work as a result of AI. Searches on Google for the future of work have gone like this in the last couple of decades. And jobs have always changed. 60% of the jobs we have today didn't exist 80 years ago. And yet, we have been able, because of the dynamic American economy, to find new and better jobs, new roles for those folks, higher paying jobs. So at Google, we've launched the American Opportunity Fund to work with community colleges and governments across the country to do that. And lastly, it's important not to forget, to make this work, we need incredible breadth and depth of energy, data centers across the country. McKinsey did a study suggesting that by 2030, the country will need 130,000 more electricians and all the skilled trades. That's going to be an important part of winning this. So again, we put forward a plan to help train 100,000 electricians and fund 30,000 electrician apprenticeships and internships around the country. So we'll have across the board the skills to meet this challenge.
Fantastic. And Doug, over to you in DIU. This dual fluency that we were talking about, you are a walking example of that dual fluency, having served in both. And I'd be curious to know how that make up for the rest of your DIU staff. But how, do we need a national effort for this staffing and education and upskilling?
Oh, I mean, the answer is absolutely. This is the center of gravity. By the way, I love that paper, and two of your co-authors, Kent, are, as we were talking the other day, are people who've been close friends for over 30 years. So it's amazing to see how kind of all that talent comes together. So that dual fluency, talent is the absolute center of gravity for DIU and for the entire innovation ecosystem for defense. And we have to take what we're doing to kind of a completely different level in this space. There's some pieces of this that are about helping to create new career fields within the military that are, in cyber and AI and even software development, autonomy. That's kind of hard, but the department knows how to do that, and it'll take too long, but we're getting after it. The pieces that I worry more about, and that we have to get after even harder, are first, increasing the number of operators, right? So operational leaders in the department who have deep fluency. So people who might fly planes or drive submarines or whatever, come to a place like DIU, learn how the technology really works, or go out and work at a place like Google for a year or so instead of going in and getting a degree at Harvard or Stanford or Yale or wherever, and then coming back to the department and someday being around the table of senior leaders, say, wait a minute, I understand this well enough to at least be able to ask the right questions at a whole nother level because I've been there. So we need to do much more of that generation of operational talent that's got deep fluency, as well as ensure that there's a basic level of fluency across the entire force. So that's the second piece. We've got to deepen the fluency and capability areas like acquisition officials who understand innovative approaches. While we have a program called, it's called the ICAP program that basically is all about generating more and more people like that.
Yeah.
We need to do more of that. And we've got to figure out how to get more people to be able to just come into the department and serve. Because unless we do that, we're not going to get there. And this is one that I think we have just scratched the surface. We've got so much more to do. I can get people to be willing to give up, to take 90% pay cuts to come work for the government to work on these critical problems because they care about our country and because they want to work on the hardest problems that matter the most. It's just hard to get them to do it when they've got to wait for a year to figure out if they can get the job or if it's going to happen, or wait till the actual paperwork comes through, or this or that or the other thing. There's a ton of things in just the basic system of how we bring people in and out of government that we must reform to get the very, very best talent aboard. This is something Congress has already helped with, but we need to do a lot more. And the last thing I'll say is we want to retain all the talent that we've got in this space as much as we can. So the people who are best in this area, we want to keep them in the department. However, those who want to get out, we should try to keep them in the reserves so we can still leverage them. And those who want to get all the way out, that's fine, because they're going to then be the alumni association of the department who's going to be out there populating all these companies and all the investors that are going to go help all these great things happen. So I think all that's great too, but we have to get much better at harnessing that and turning that incredible network into something meaningful that we can use for our national security together.
An AI National Guard Reserve unit, I think, is being born here. I love that idea. Okay, we're almost out of time, but we wanted to wrap with something forward-looking. Would love to ask both of you a question about risk. So we often hear that we're in a pivotal moment. I think that's used in lots of different theaters. But right now, at this pivotal moment in AI and national security, what's one risk we absolutely cannot afford to overlook right now as we scale our national AI capabilities? Maybe we could start with you, Doug.
So, but I think the fundamental risk is really all about culture. We're making enormous progress in so many ways. We've talked about a lot of them today, but the biggest challenge that we have is actually the way we think about risk. I came home from my own experience in Iraq and Afghanistan a long time ago now, realizing that most of what I'd spent my civilian career thinking about as risk, and I'd worked on risk, was not risk, it was uncertainty. Risk is risk to mission, risk to force, strategic risk for our nation. And what we have to do is we've got to get better at taking process risk, financial risk, reputational risk, because we might look stupid if something doesn't work. taking those kind of risks now so that we don't translate that into real risk to the airmen, guardians, soldiers, sailors, Marines, Coast Guardsmen. They're going to have to fight the war if we go fight it. So it's all about changing our culture around risk and being willing to take the right ones.
Excellent. And maybe, Kent, you could bring us on home on that risk question.
Yeah, one of my favorite books in this area is called Searching for Safety, which was written by a U.S. nuclear regulator. And the argument is that the riskiest thing you can do is not take risks, because you're stuck in a little local maxima and not actually being able to get to a better state. So if we had not been willing to take risks, not been willing to experiment, we'd be driving.
Imagine an AI that can not only process information.
Okay.
There's audio risk.
Okay, there you go. That's an experiment. If we had never taken risks, we'd be stuck with an enhanced Model T, but never have discovered anti-lock brakes. So while we need to have the guardrails in place, while we need to make sure that we bring people along and build trust in these technologies, the biggest risk that we're concerned about is the risk of missing out.
So that's an outstanding way to end that discussion. The biggest risk is not taking that risk, and I love that. Doug Beck, DIU, Kent Walker, Google, thank you so much for joining this conversation. Please help me thank Kent and Doug.
Thank you.